Welcome, hello, my name is Phillip Knoll. On behalf of Google Chicago and Chicago Gigglers for Pride Week, I'm excited to welcome Nathan Albert to Talks at Google. He is a professional actor turned ordained pastor, a blogger turned author, and a single guy turned married man and father. And he is the creator and podcast of the podcast called The Why Behind the What, and the author of Embracing Love, My Journey to Hugging a Man in His Underwear. So, Nathan earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Musical Theater, performance from Rockford College, and a Master of Divinity from North Park Theological Seminary. And he and his wife, Kate, now have a son named Foster, and currently live in Rhode Island. Embracing Love is a story behind the iconic photograph, seen by millions around the world. It was taken along the Chicago Pride Parade route, where he and his friends were bearing signs of apology on behalf of Christians who had failed to show love to the LGBTQ community. In Embracing Love, Nathan also shares his own personal and pastoral stories of the LGBTQ community. For Googlers and in the audience, please think your questions for the Q&A. We have a microphone in the middle of the room, and there's also a dory. So please join me in welcoming to the Google stage, Nathan Albert.
Well, hello, and it's good to be back in Chicago. I used to live in Andersonville and Albany Park, so it's always good to be back home, and I don't want to leave. And it's always good to be with Googlers. I did a talk in New York City a few months ago, and it was great, and I fell in love with Google. Even though I don't regularly use Google+, but I Google things. But I'm probably the least qualified person to ever be a Googler, as a Bachelor in Musical Theater Performance and a Master's in Divinity. But it is my new dream to become a Googler. So if you need a tap dancing chaplain, I could be that person for your Google community. As Phillip said, I'm an actor turned pastor, which is just weird. I live in the ocean state of Rhode Island, originally though from the suburbs, moved into Chicago for a long time. Married to Kate. We have a 1.5-year-old kid named Foster. He's a rock star, so he's really cool. If this doesn't go well, I could just switch over to telling stories about him, and it could be much more entertaining than what I'm doing. But I am the author of this book, Embracing Love, My Journey to Hugging a Man in His Underwear. And it's based off of a few things. So today what I'll do is kind of give a summary of the book, share a few stories, and then we'll open it up to Q&A and dialogue, which is what I'm really looking forward to as well. So the book is part autobiographical. It kind of shares my story of growing up in a traditional and conservative Christian environment in the suburbs of Chicago. Eventually, I was immersed into the LGBT community and really the gay and lesbian community when I worked as a professional actor and singer. It chronicles my journey to becoming a pastor and going to seminary, and then this viral blog post that happened in 2010. And so it kind of shares my own education about the gay community and the gay rights movement and gay history. And then it's also, secondly, it's part theological. And so I look at the 6 main passages in the Bible that are often used to talk about homosexuality. And I do that looking from both a traditional viewpoint and a progressive viewpoint. So those looking at the Greek and the Hebrew, and how do scholars or Christians or church communities come to a certain conclusion about sexuality from a traditional viewpoint, but also a more progressive viewpoint, and kind of that spectrum. And then I also talk about what is the church, and how can the church community or spiritual communities remain together even if they might differ on certain things, and how can we, instead of fighting ugly, how can we really learn and understand from one another? And then finally, it's part pastoral. So as a pastor and as an actor turned pastor, how do I pastor LGBT individuals? How do I pastor parents who come to me and say, I have a child, what should I do? Or someone who comes to me and says, I've had this conservative belief all my years, and now I have a gay child, and these things are in tension. How do I pastor in that? And for me, this is a really holy thing, and I consider these holy moments. And so I dedicate some time in the book to that as well. So today I want to share a few stories from the book, and then again we'll open it up for dialogue. Before we get too far, I want to make it clear that it's my hope with my book and with my work and with my life and this Google Talk that I never want to speak at people, and I never want to speak for people, but instead I'm trying to speak with people. and encourage others to speak with. And I think especially in this topic, when it comes to religion and faith and the LGBT community, these can become very heated, or, really any topic that is often divisive. I think it's better and it's crucial that we discipline ourselves to talk with one another rather than at or for one another. A quick story to illustrate. My dad, who came to with me today, he works at O'Hare Airport, and a few years ago, he asked me for some advice, which is always interesting when your dad asks you for advice. But he said, Nathan, I work at O'Hare, a diverse environment, lots of people, and I'm a kind of this Christian guy, a white guy. He had a coworker who was a gay Jewish man. Total, that makes for the start of a great joke. A gay Jewish coworker and a conservative Christian are at work together. And he said, Nathan, how do you think I can engage this conversation at work? What do I do? And I said, well, most simply, I think you can just ask them, what is it like to be you? And so, lo and behold, he actually took my advice and went to his coworker, and they were on break in the office. And eventually, he kind of said, coworker, I forget his name, but I'm a Christian. This is a heated topic for many people, and I just am curious, what is it like to be you as a gay individual working at this airport? What is it like? What's it like to work here? Are there difficulties? Are there struggles? And that question started a 45-minute conversation, where at the end of that 45-minute conversation, my dad's coworker said to him, or invited my dad and my mom to a barbecue at their house. And so what I love about that story is they started as coworkers, and within the course of 45 minutes, they became friends. And since then, their friendship has developed, and they text back and forth, and they're good friends. But I think asking this question, what is it like to be you, is one of the best ways that we learn to talk with one another. And it breaks down stereotypes. It allows for empathy and the beginning of understanding. And it can move us from being strangers to being friends. Now, when I was in high school, and it's crazy, I'm not that old, but 20 years ago when I was in high school, I didn't have many gay friends. And then Facebook came out, and I realized I did have gay friends, and they weren't out. And I was amazed at how many came out. But it was so different than the world today, right? But I was part of a system that demonized and dehumanized gay individuals. And I readily participated in that. And really, not knowing gay individuals at that time, it was really that I was bashing maybe the more effeminate kids, or really probably the kids that weren't through puberty yet, And so I was a part of this system that was using these stereotypes to hurt and demonize other people, and much of which were these abstract ideas about other people that in reality were completely false. And so much of my story is the breaking down of these abstract ideas about people, because I began developing relationships with people. And it was and it's also been a breaking down of my own privilege, and as I gain awareness and understanding of the lives of others and their experiences. And so now many of my relationships with the broader gay and lesbian community happened while I worked as a professional actor and singer. And so the musical theater world, for whatever reason, is very welcoming to the broader gay community. In the musical theater world, it's basically you're gay until proven straight. That's just how the job works. You get to rehearsal, and everyone's gay until you find out differently. And so I developed a lot of close relationships in that season. And there were times where I was the only heterosexual guy in a theatrical production, and that just came with the territory. But what I learned during that time drastically impacted the course of my life. I learned that a disproportionately high number of my gay and lesbian and people that were a part of the LGBTQ community, a disproportionately high number of them had horrific and negative experiences with either people in the church, those who consider themselves Christians, or just the church or spiritual communities in general. And I heard story after story after story after story of friends that had these incredibly painful things happen to them at the hands of people who considered themselves Christian. I had a friend many friends who were kicked out of their churches when they came out, or they were leaders in their youth group and they came out and the pastor said, you can no longer be a part of this community. I had a friend who was spit upon by his roommate as they were both attending a Christian university. I know a teenager that when he came out, his coming out process was also memories of when he was in 5th grade and he was told by a leader of a church that gay people go to hell. And that impacted his coming out process. So story after story of this. One story that actually impacted me the most was my best friend Jeff. He and I performed together here in Illinois. We did some shows together, and when our contract was over, he moved off to Broadway, and he did some the Les Mis revival, and he's been on Broadway ever since, and I moved into seminary. But he shared a story with me that he was sharing a dressing room with this gentleman, and his name was Dave, and they were hanging out backstage in the dressing room as the show was going on, and eventually the time of topic, or the topic of discussion came to bash Christians. And so they were pointing out and making fun of the hypocrisy of Christians, and everyone was having a good time. And, sometimes it is a good time to bash the hypocrisy of Christians. And so people were laughing, and then it kind of turned a corner. And Dave almost became mean and said, I hate Christians. They're ignorant, and I wish that all Christians would drop dead. And so my friend Jeff, who was raised in a church community, kind of pulled him aside after and said, I'm your friend. I'm a Christian. You know that. And I just want you to be aware, some of that stings me. And Dave responded back and he said, your beliefs are anathema to me. And having you, a Christian, in this dressing room is like having a Nazi in here. And he walked away. Dave and Jeff have continued their friendship, but one of the things that was so astonishing is that some other Christian individual hurt Dave so badly that for him, a Nazi and a Christian were the same thing. And so it's shocking to me that there have been people who have done so much damage to other people's lives who profess to be people who are following the way of Jesus. And my guess is that either some of you in this room or have had similar experiences, or that some of you, and if not all of us, know someone who has had a similar experience. And so as I continued in my journey, I found myself with these two loves that didn't seem to love one another. So I loved the church. I loved the spirituality. I loved some of these ancient spiritual practices that have been around for thousands of years that kind of give me a peace or a calmness or a sense of prayer or these things that I just find that benefit my life so well. Or the places where I found mercy and community and great friendships and hope and justice and love. And at the same time, I loved my friends. I loved them. And many of them, as part of the gay community, they have welcomed me, a heterosexual Christian, into their community with such love and acceptance. And so I had these two loves. And yet I was confused that my gay friends, whom I loved, didn't love or didn't want to be a part of the church that I loved. And the church that I loved didn't seem to love or want to have my friends whom I loved. And so I was confused by this tension between these two loves. And what I came to learn, and I think the Christian community some parts of the Christian community may not realize this, but this isn't a battle between the Christian community and the gay community or the LGBT community. That this battle is a civil war. It's a civil war. When I worked with the Marin Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that was here in Chicago. And we did a national study that looked at the broader gay and lesbian community and faith. And this has now been turned into a book by Andrew Marin. It's called Us Versus Us. But we found in that study that 86% of the LGBT community was raised in a denominationally affiliated religion. So Catholic, Protestant, Lutheran, some evangelical churches, Assembly of God, 86% was raised in a Christian-based religion. Of that 86%, 73% said that they are no longer practicing the religion in which they were raised. And there's a handful of reasons. Some of that is theology on human sexuality. Some of that is the hypocrisy, some of that is some doctrines they don't understand, and the list kind of goes on. And 20% of that is they're practicing a different religion, perhaps Buddhism or some other religion. And what influenced, and this is a shocking statistic, but what would influence a person to return to the religion in which they were raised? 62% of the 86% said that there was absolutely nothing that would encourage them to return back to their religion. Now, as someone who is a pastor, this is like one of the most gut-wrenching statistics for me. And so what I saw happening is that the LGBT community, they were kicked out of churches, and they were shunned from a community that professed love. And what did the LGBT community do? I think you have created their own community, their own church, that is incredibly loving, wildly accepting, and actually does church better than many Christian communities do. That actually, I believe that the Christian community has so much to learn from the LGBT community about how to care, how to love, how to defend, how to accept, how to cherish their people. And I think the gay community has been more like a church than many other churches claim to be. And so eventually I entered seminary, where I assumed everyone had a similar experience to me. We're going to Roscoe's and Sidetrack and Scarlet. Like, you just always went to those places. And then I got to seminary, and that was not the case at all. But I did introduce a lot of seminarians to Boys Town, I will say that. And this is where I also adapted a lot of my schoolwork and my writing and my reading specifically to faith and human sexuality, which is then what I did was I wrote my thesis on human sexuality, and which I condensed basically into one chapter in my book. But while I was doing all that, this is where we get to the Chicago Pride Parade in 2010. A handful of us, about 20 of us, decided to do what we called the I'm Sorry campaign. And so those of you who have been a part of the Gay Pride Parade here in Chicago, you know that at the end of the parade route, there's a group of protesters, and they are some sort of Christian organization, and they have megaphones, and they have signs that say pretty horrific things, and they're behind police barricade, and they spend their time at the parade shouting pretty vile things to those who pass by. And so we decided we wanted to be an alternative Christian voice. The group of us decided we kind of wanted to have this as a confessional booth, right? Like, confession is a part of our religious tradition, that maybe we should confess that we were a part of dehumanizing a group of people and excluding people, and we wanted to start the process of making amends. So what we did is we got together and we made T-shirts that said "I'm sorry," and then we got some poster board and we had a sign-making party, and we wrote all sorts of things on the signs. Things like, sorry for the way the church has treated you, sorry that Christians have kicked you out. One of my favorites was, I used to be a Bible-banging homophobe, sorry. And we set them up in the parade route, or in the fence of the parade route, and we were right at the IHOP, kind of at the bend of the parade route, and we just enjoyed the parade. And so throughout the parade, people, we had all sorts of different reactions. People came up and said, "Well, what are you doing? What are you sorry for? And we got to explain why we were there. And one moment in particular, which is what I wrote a blog post about, a gentleman who I later learned his name was Tristan, was dancing on top of a float in his whitey tighties. He had abs of steel that I could never have if I worked at them for the rest of my life. And he was dancing up on the float. And he came around the bend, and he saw our signs, or he saw our shirts, and he yelled at me. He said, "What are you sorry for? It's Pride. Be happy. Celebrate." And I simply pointed down to our signs. And I saw his face read across all the signs, which we have a picture cycling through as well. And he read all the signs, and he jumped down off the float, and he came running towards us, and there's a group of 3 or 4 of us that were all right there, and he just dove into our arms, and he said, "Thank you." The exact moment when that happened, a woman happened to be taking photos of the parade, and she actually snapped that photo and sent that to me later in the week. I wrote a blog post about that experience called "I Hugged a Man in His Underwear." Now, at the time, my blog had like 4 readers: me, my dad, my mom, and maybe my friend. So it really was, it was not a popular blog. It still isn't. But it went crazy. It absolutely went crazy. It was viewed, I think, like over 140 million times. The picture's been viewed like 130 million times. It was picked up by the BBC and Australia Herald. BuzzFeed put it in its of another viral blog post that they had called 21 Pictures That Will Restore Your Hope in Humanity. That went viral like almost 20 million times. It was voted Best Picture on Imgur a couple years in a row. All sorts of people have tweeted about it, and usually around every year around this time, it somehow pops up in social media. And so it's always funny when people are like, is that you? Are you in that? And we had never intended to make a well-known blog post or make any public known thing. That was not our intention. We simply wanted, as group of 20 of us, we simply wanted to publicly apologize. And so since then, it's been done almost every year at the Chicago Pride Parade. It's been adapted now, and there's actually now a counter-protest called Make Love Louder. So if you're at the Pride Parade, they actually are in front of the protesters at the end of the parade. So you'll see them there if you're there. And so that's what we did. And one of the things about the protesters, there's this scriptural verse that talks about if you speak and you don't have love, you end up sounding like clanging cymbals and gongs. And the protesters at the end of the parade route, for me, are the personification of that scriptural verse, that they are banging cymbals and noise, because there is no love. Now, there's been all sorts of feedback from this. Some people love it. Some people hate it. I had countless emails from people, Christian individuals, who loved what we did, are thankful for what we did. And I had probably even more Christians who thought I was a heretic and that I am working with the Antichrist or whatever it might be, threatening our lives. And at the same time, members of the LGBT community, there are individuals who are so thankful for what we did. And then there are others who have said, well, you're really just wolves in sheep clothing, or you're sorry is too late, it's not enough. And I get all of that. But the topic of sexuality and the Bible isn't an issue, or it's not some problem we have to fix, or it's not some conflict that needs to be resolved. This is about people. It's about people created by God, people loved by God, and people who long to belong to a spiritual community. And what I've seen is that so many people, especially those within the LGBT community, and I've experienced this myself, and I think that 86%, I think this applies to them, they've experienced a model of church or spiritual community or a faith community on a following pattern, which I think is wrong. I call this, and this is a section in my book as well, but there is a way of church that says the model is behave and believe and belong. And so the idea goes like this. Some churches will profess saying, if you want to be a part of our community, you have to behave first. So you have to do the right things and stop doing the wrong things. For some, if you're gay, well, you need to pray the gay away or be celibate, whatever it might be. And if you behave the right way, well, then you have to believe all the right things. So you need to believe these things are sin and this is right and this is wrong. You need to believe this about our culture and this about God. And then if you behave the right way and you believe all the right things, guess what? You can then belong to a loving and accepting community. But that's a complete fraud. It's not loving. It's completely conditional. It's loving with strings attached. It's behavior modification. And in my opinion, as I've studied the scriptures, this is actually antithetical to the way of Jesus that I see in the Bible. A better model that I've come to define is belong, believe, and become. And so you belong to a community where it is a safe place where anyone can belong. You don't have to believe yet. You can doubt. You can just belong. You can be accepted. You can be known. You can know others. You are warmly welcomed into this environment. You are welcomed into the journey that is happening, which is life. And in this space of belonging, then you can figure out what you believe. Maybe you doubt, maybe you ask questions, maybe you wrestle with things, maybe you never come to belief at all. It doesn't matter. But then, if you do believe, then there's this way to become, your spirituality helps you become a different type of person, or it helps you live a life of flourishing. And that's of any type of spirituality, right? Like it helps you flourish. And so for me, I think it's better to belong to a community of love, believe in the God of love, and then you become a person who lives a life of love. Now, one quick example from the Bible. I won't spend too much time on the Bible, but one of my favorite characters in the Bible is this guy named Thomas. He's also known as Doubting Thomas. I don't know how many of you know the story of Doubting Thomas, but Thomas is this character in the Bible. He's a follower of Jesus, and he only shows up 6 times, 3 of which are simply lists of like his name. So 3 times it's like the followers of Jesus were Thomas, 2 times he's like this. He gets a bad rap, like the Doubting Thomas. He's actually quite bold. So 2 times he's things like, Jesus says, we're going to go down to Jerusalem. And Thomas is like, I'm going with you. I'll follow you. That's pretty bold. And then the other one, he says something very similar, like, I'll follow you to death. And then there's the famous Doubting Thomas scene. And in this scene, the story goes like this. Jesus was executed. He died, and he had been raised from the dead. And the women and the disciples, this group of men and women, are celebrating. Like, our rabbi, who we've been following for 3 years, is no longer dead. Now, Thomas does the most human thing I think he does, and is like, nope. Like, I think any of us would do that if someone was like, our friend is raised from the dead. Nope, didn't happen. That's crazy. You're all insane. And he says, I'm not going to believe that until I touch his wounds, where he was crucified, hung up on that cross. I'm not going to, until I touch his hands and touch his side, I'm not going to believe this. So the story says this, which is really interesting. It says a week goes by. And so for a whole week, the disciples are still celebrating. The followers of Jesus are like, he's been raised from the dead. And Thomas is hanging out with them like, nope, y'all crazy, And then Jesus appears. And the first thing Jesus does is he says, peace be with you, which I think is smart. Because like if someone raised from the dead like showed up in this room, we'd all be like, ah! And he's like, peace, calm down, like chill, right? So that's the first thing Jesus says. That's my translation. And then he immediately turns to Thomas and he says, Thomas, put your hand here. Touch my side. Stop doubting, believe. Now, I think this is a powerful sentence because he could have been like, Thomas, you're an idiot. For a whole week, you belong to this community, you didn't believe. He didn't discipline. He said, come here, come figure it out. And what happens is, Thomas then immediately worships God. The phrase he says is, he immediately worships God. And then we know that eventually Thomas brought the church and the Christian faith to India, and then eventually was martyred for his faith. So here is a man, for 3 years, he belonged to this community of followers of Jesus. For 3 years, he was known in this community. And then other people were believing these things about Jesus, and he didn't believe them. But eventually he came to belief, and then after that, he, for some reason, got so passionate that he actually brought this message all the way to India and was willing to die for his beliefs. So I think this is the model that churches should be. When I was here in Chicago, a group of us started a small group, and this is a similar story that's more on a personal level. We started a small group for gay and lesbian or trans individuals, and there were about 12 or 15 people that were a part of it. A few heterosexuals, a couple people were married, some were not out at all. So it was like almost a very secretive group that they were a part of. And so we started this community basically to be a safe place where for many people, they didn't feel safe in other parts of the church community. So we started this Bible study to care for one another and read these scriptures together. And so the first night we kind of went around the room and shared why we wanted to be a part of this. And the last gentleman who went, his name was Michael. And Michael had never been to the church. He'd never been a part of a community. I met him that night. He was the last one to go, and he said, I've been looking for a place where I can just be me and breathe. And tonight I feel as if I can finally breathe. And so this is what I think life is all about, that it is creating spaces where we can breathe, where we can be fully known and fully know others. And I think this is especially true among spiritual communities, that in the spiritual life is about finding places to breathe, to be yourself, to be known by God, to let yourself have that vulnerability to be known by other people, to be known by God, to know people, to get to know the divine. to be unashamed who you are, and to know that no matter what, you are deeply, deeply loved. Growing up, going back to my dad used to always say, "Buds," and he calls me Buds, and still at 36, he calls me Buds. But he'd say, "Buds, life is all about relationships." And it used to be just this mantra he'd say, and he'd be like, yeah, Dad, life's all about relationships. But I think he's onto something, that I think life is all about relationships. There's a rabbi who said, when you don't know people, when you don't know them, when you don't have relationship with them, it's easy to demonize and dehumanize them. But when you do know people, it's almost impossible to demonize and dehumanize them. And so lately, I've seen how much people want to be right more than they want to be in relationship. I've been experiencing that a lot in my life. And frankly, I don't find being right as appealing anymore. I read a great quote actually on my flight out here. It said, "Christianity isn't about being right, it's about being loved." And I think in this day and age, like not just in the topic of human sexuality and faith and religion, but in our culture, in our political climate, many of us don't know other people. And we isolate ourselves with people that are just like us or that look like us, and that we need to do a better job of being in relationship with other people. And I could be wrong on this, maybe. I'm probably wrong about a lot, but I'd rather be in relationship with a diverse and messy and awkward and crazy group of people who love one another and care for one another and welcome one another and cherish one another and honor one another and allow one another the space to breathe. Even if that means things are messy and there's disagreements, I'd rather be in relationship with people than fight to be right. I think I would lay down, I think I'd go to the floor on that one, because I think life is all about relationships. And when you truly know people, it changes everything. So let me just end with one last thing as kind of a pastoral word to those who, especially you who are here, who might be a part of the LGBTQ community. As a pastor and as a Christian, first, I want to apologize for the way that you have been hurt by people who call themselves followers of Jesus. I am sorry that there has been pain caused to your hearts and to your souls, and possibly even physically to your body, by people who consider themselves followers of the God of love. I'm sorry that I was a part of a system that demonized and dehumanized the LGBTQ community, and the countless ways that, or the countless times that I thought it was better to remain silent than to speak up. I'm sorry that so many continue to believe that abstract ideas about a community and false ideas about you, that they do that rather than try to be in relationship with you. I'm sorry that there are preachers who use the pulpit where they should only be talking about the God of love to use it to condemn you or people groups. And I'm sorry that people push you away rather than embrace you and create spaces where you can simply breathe. So if there is any inkling within your soul somewhere interested in the spiritual life, I just want to encourage you to keep going. Don't give up on God because God's followers didn't reflect the God of love. And I would say don't give up on Jesus because Jesus' followers, some of them might not have been very Jesus-like. There is always space for you and for me around the table that God invites us to. There's always a place for us. There's always a place for us to find a place where we can breathe. And I would say this, especially to the LGBT community. We as Christians don't deserve your forgiveness for some of the things that have been said in the name of God. But I ask that you would be gracious to us. I ask that you would treat us the way you wish we first had treated you, because we have a lot to learn from you. So that's all I got. So with that, I'm going to open it up to Phillip and questions, and we'll keep the dialogue going. So thanks.
Thank you. Come on. All right. I will. Thanks. Cool. You want to keep the podium? All right. All right. Hello. Okay, so I know we had a similar talk like this in New York, and I have a couple questions that I thought were pertinent. I also want to open up to the audience, but I think I'll start it off. So there's a a lot probably of experiences that you've had since you wrote the book. So can you kind of share, like, what do you think was the most poignant or the best thing that's come out of having written this, and sort of the impact on your life or the lives of others, and how's that been for you since you've done that?
Yeah, I've gotten, people love it and people hate it. So it's really interesting. I think probably the most, probably the two most, the feedback that I've gotten best from people have been parents of gay children that have read it, that have thanked me for just voicing some things that they needed to hear. And I have a whole section in the book directed towards parents who have gay children. So that's a theme that comes up in the book. So that's always been a feedback. And I have a bunch of friends that appear in the book, many of whom are gay, and they've loved the book. So that's just encouraging. I have a student in Rhode Island who, she's reading the book. She's in like 8th grade. She came out to me as pansexual, and she said that the book is giving her a renewed sense of faith. So I think that's pretty cool. I've also had people who think I'm a heretic and have written horrific things about me and letters, and so that's really fun. I enjoy that. I really do.
Yeah, so I guess that was one of the things I had. Follow-up, yeah. So you said people had questioned your own sexuality, not just because you were involved in musical theater, I presume, but because you're taking a kind of unifying stance on human sexuality.
Yeah.
And what kind of, have there been negative repercussions or feedback like that you've gotten from within the religious community, from within LGBTQ community? I mean, how has that been?
Yeah. So one of the things I do in the book that I think confuses people is, especially when the section on the Bible, I lay out a whole spectrum of belief. And what I don't do is say you need to believe one side or the other. And I'm intentional in that because every book I've read says, hey, if you believe this, you're a bigot and a homophobe, you need to believe this. And then other books say, if you're like progressive and really open and affirming, you're like this crazy liberal and you need to believe this. And I don't think any of that is helpful. So what I did is I laid it out there and then I was like, you got to figure it out yourself. Good luck. You're all adults. Like, you should be able to like figure out what you think. But that actually bothers a lot of people, right? Because some are saying, well, because you didn't say this, it means you must believe this, which means you're like that. And I'm like, oh, no, not true at all. Or, vice versa, whether it's, like when we did the Pride Parade, right? Like some people said, well, they're wolves in sheep clothing, right? So, oh, you're Christians, but you still believe this about sexuality. So really, you're out to get us. Mm-hmm. You're tricking us. So I think that's happened, and yeah, other people repercussions. There have been quite a few, but I guess it comes with the terrain. I guess. It's heated for people. And I think some people, when they're challenged in a new way of thinking, rather than seeing it as an opportunity for growth, it becomes a threat. And so for me in this process, I've never been threatened in any of this. I think this is exciting, like, oh, I'm learning something new, or I never knew those Greek words in the Bible could be translated this way. In the English, it always says this. Oh, maybe it means something else. Like, that's an exciting process for me of growth and learning rather than I'm afraid of what that might mean, Right.
So, yeah, absolutely. I want to, don't be shy in the audience. Also, if you have a question, come up to the mic. No trouble. Nothing on the door yet. If anyone's out there wants the door, it's cool too.
Hey there. Thanks for your talk. So I guess I just have a question about, I totally understand your point of view, and I completely agree with all the things you've said. I guess my question for you is, have you ever struggled with, then why religion at all? Like, you can have all of these things without being a Christian or a Baptist or anything, right? You can live as an atheist a more Christian life than many Christians are. As you've sort of explored this and through your education, ever struggled with your faith as you've explored this and made it your career and all of it, and sort of just how this all came about for you?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we're trying to, the spiritual life, we're trying to wrap our minds around something that we consider to be divine, or really completely, or not completely fathomable. So I think that innately brings doubt and questions, and yeah. But I've become convinced that the way of Jesus is really a beautiful way to live. And so for me, it's not a, there are other religions that I think there are beautiful ways to live. And I love the way of Jesus and am following that way. Yeah, so you're right. Like, I do think there are, I just think Christians got to get their act together. Like, when an atheist lives a better Christian life, whatever that might mean, than Christians, it just makes you question what is the definition of Christian then, or why, yeah. But I think the pursuit of, spiritual things is, it's like a searching for treasure, I guess. I'm not sure that answers your question, but yeah. But yeah, I doubt, and I think I think doubt is a part of faith. So any faith tradition. Yeah. Other questions? Oh.
Hey man, thanks so much for sharing. So in your journey, what have been some of the highest peaks, and then what have been some of the lowest lows as you have kind of sought to live in the tension, and then what have been some of the surprises on either the upside or the downside?
Wow, good question. All right, the highs and the lows and some surprises.
And the highs can be totally superfluous.
They can be totally superfluous.
Okay. The lows, I'm amazed that people are willing to give up relationship or friendship because they disagree with the way you think. So I've had some people that I don't know say some of the meanest things about me via email and letters to communities or social media, that like, just you just shouldn't say to someone's face. Like, it's crazy. And so I think that always catches me by surprise. Oh, I thought you were like a decent human being. The things coming out of your mouth right now. Okay. And I don't know how to, and I don't know how to, I'm sorry. I don't know how to not take that personally. So I am still learning how to get some negative feedback, like, oh, you're this type of person, and not let that affect me as a person. There's a speaker I know who talks about that sometimes you can die by death, or you can die from paper cuts. And so sometimes I feel as if I get a lot of paper cuts, and eventually I could bleed to death from paper cuts. So it's an image that I've always wrestled with. So I think that's some of the lows. I think some of the highs have, I guess it's seeing people like Michael, who said, I've been looking for a place where I can breathe. Like, all we did was open up our home, and someone who had such like a journey that we don't even know about, it was like a space where he could just like breathe. Those type of moments, I think, are some of the coolest ones. Or hearing of someone who reconciled with their parents after years of turmoil. I think some of the surprises would be some of the people I get to meet along the way. So like doing Google Talks, this is awesome. But I never thought I'd ever get to do this here or in New York. So But getting to meet people along the way and to learn like there is something that unites us as humans, like that can connect us. And so that I think has been some of the surprises for me. Yeah. Others.
So I've got a question
Bring it.
on that. So you talked a little bit about doubt, and you talked earlier about doubting Thomas, and that stay with it aspect of it, kind of struck me. And I know when we were talking over lunch, we talked a little bit about something you mentioned also, which was who is the other, and that concept of trying to work past that abstract notion of the other person, the other group, or the other sort of ideology or philosophy. So I'm wondering what kind of advice do you have, regarding any perceived divide or actual divide, to stay with it for Christians, for LGBTQ individuals? I mean, how to stay with it, how to work past that doubt?
Yeah. I would say that to stay with it, what comes often past the bend of stay with it can be reconciliation, which is a really beautiful thing. And I see this best with gay children and parents. And I often say to many of my gay friends who, when they come out to their parents, what happens is a shift happens where they become, and we talked a little bit about this at lunch, where they become the parent and the parents act like little children. So it's like, my son's gay? What? And they bang and they pout and they stomp around, like they act like little kids having a temper tantrum. And in that moment, I always encourage that the child becomes the parent and has to parent that parent through this process. And every time that I've seen that happen, it has always ended in a positive and good relationship. And now I think there are times where ending relationships are important when they become abusive and emotionally or spiritually, physically abusive. There's no doubt about that certain relationships need to end, and so I'm not saying that. But I think around that bend comes a reconciliation and a type of relationship that just is better than what it was even before. So I think that's one of the glimpses of if you stay with it. And the whole like it gets better campaign that started years ago. I don't know of anyone that wouldn't disagree, that disagrees with that.
We have such conciliatory notions here in Chicago, must be.
Yeah,
Another
right?
Chicagoan started that, right?
I know. So, man, Chicago is the hub of all things amazing, basically.
I like to think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a question because I grew up in a Catholic family, and I've seen this before in like family meet gatherings and everything, where I have some relatives that aren't necessarily accepting of the LGBTQ community.
Yep.
They are never really outwardly aggressive towards it, but they will say things that are veiled with their kind of aversion to it. And I'm always kind of on the borderline of how do you approach that? Because at times it's like, maybe I don't say anything because it's not worth disrupting this event, right?
Yep.
But how would you recommend talking to friends and families where, they're not on the spectrum of chanting at a gay pride parade about the evils, but that it's rooted in them that they have a belief that it is wrong. So how do you approach that?
Yeah. I think it needs to be addressed, right? So, it almost becomes a joke in our culture that every Thanksgiving meal, you're going to have the crazy uncle who's homophobic and racist, and he's going to say some things, and you all are going to like kind of roll your eyes and be like, "Oh, uncle." But what the thing is, that individual might have kids and raise their kids in the same way. So I don't think we have the option anymore to not speak out. And I don't mean like becoming like confrontational, simply like, "Oh, you can't say that racist comment anymore." And saying it at the table. Like those things have to stop. So you can't joke about that community anymore like that. Not at this table. And I think that it needs to stop because and I think this is not just on human sexuality, but I think it's on race, our views of, right? Like all that's going on in our culture right now with immigration reform or whatever it might be, like these are comments that come up in all sorts of ways, and there needs to be the boldness of saying, no, that Dad, you can't say that. You just don't. Well, why not? You can't. Like, and I haven't always done that either. But I think it takes a boldness within ourselves to start those conversations. Yeah.
Cool. So we got 2 minutes left.
2 minutes.
I'd love to ask you something really challenging, which is basically, how do we save the world then? I think no big deal, right? No pressure. So I've been thinking about it, right? So the kind of things you're saying are about how do you look at big conflicts and big ideological positions that seem immovable or seem intractable. And you've talked on spectra not just beyond religion or human sexuality, but you talked a little bit about economic justice in your book and your other talks. You talked about other faiths and racial issues, a lot of disparities in the world. Is there something that you've learned that people can take from this talk and apply in their lives, or how do you approach a challenge like that? What can we do that you've learned to try to make the world better with your experiences?
Wow. This answer is probably going to fail us all.
Nah.
I guess I'm in this season where I am more and more intrigued by the diversity of humanity and getting to know people that are so different than me. So I don't know, lately I've actually been on like a Catholic kick where I've been like reading all these Catholic authors, and they always talk about the way they connect to God is like totally different than I've ever thought of. It's like all about union with the divine. And I'm like, that's cool. I kind of want that. Or my friends in like different, I'm a part of a clergy group that we're like a smattering of like Unitarian Universalists and imams, Muslims and rabbis and Lutherans, and we get together every month and like hang out and eat meals and talk, and it's like the coolest thing ever. So I guess I think the importance of a diversity of relationship, or when we are in a culture that we defriend people on social media because of their views or whatever, that actually I think we actually need some of those people in our lives to learn about them and about ourselves, and so we break down some of the stereotypes, and we move from like abstract ideas to the humanity that unites all people. I guess I don't know if that would really save the world, because some days I really think the world is, oh man, it's jacked up. But yeah, and then that I think hopefully then empowers us to pursue justice and to create changes that will make the world better.
Humanity and justice. I think we can all get behind that.
I hope.
All right. Well, hey, I want to thank you very much for coming out. Thank you for all of you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
And for your attention. So for everyone who's going to be sticking around afterwards, Nathan's got some books, like we said. He'll be around for a little bit. After this, it is Pride Week, so we're going to be having a very special gathering later on at IFFE on a rooftop, and also a Pride Happy Hour up in Lakeview. If anyone's interested, come to me. I'll tell you about it. Nathan, thank you so much for coming. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks. Nice job. You did a good job.